Unwinding anxiety. Chapter 1. Anxiety is a bad habit. Anxiety, feelings of unease, usually about an uncertain outcome, can mean many things to different people. For some, these feelings are an occasional response to stressful situations such as an impromptu meeting with a boss or manager. But for others, anxiety is a chronic condition that affects everyday life and can lead to negative, even addictive, coping behaviors. Chances are, we've all experienced anxiety in some form, whether it's the occasional racing heart or an unending torrent of unwanted thoughts. So here's the question: how can we cope? How should we manage our minds in the moment to unwind our anxiety? Judson Brewer, a Brown University neuroscientist and psychiatrist, has been studying this question for 20 years. And unfortunately, there are many wrong answers. Over the course of his career, he has treated many patients whose coping mechanisms exacerbated their anxiety or resulted in unhealthy and addictive behaviors. He believes this is because many coping strategies disconnect us from our anxiety. Perhaps we stress eat or drink in times of stress. This is an attempt to distract ourselves from how we're feeling in the moment. Or maybe we doom scroll or worry, trying to understand all possible, usually worst-case, scenarios. This may seem like the opposite of avoiding anxiety, but when we ruminate or catastrophize, our minds are no longer in the now. Rather than engaging with our current feelings, we end up trapped in a sea of terrifying hypotheticals. All these coping strategies give our brains something to do, which feels good in the moment. But they don't resolve our anxiety. Usually, they make us feel worse. And when we are frequently anxious, anxiety becomes something we turn to more and more. It becomes a habit. One of Brewer's patients even started to feel like anxiety was part of her. It was carved in her bones to the point where she couldn't differentiate it from herself. So what should we do to resolve our anxiety? In his instant bestseller Unwinding Anxiety, Brewer guides us to understand our anxiety in order to break out of it. In the next chapters, we'll explore what causes anxiety and how it can hide in and perpetuate our bad habits. We'll learn to step out of our anxiety by mapping out our triggers, behaviors, and outcomes. And we'll share a step-by-step plan for recognizing, investigating, and resolving anxiety with curiosity and mindfulness. The main ideas. Chapter 1. Anxiety is defined as feelings of unease, usually about something with an uncertain outcome. When anxious, we often rely on negative coping strategies that can in turn produce more anxiety. Chapter 2. Our two brains. How do our minds get wound up in the first place? Brewer separates the brain into two regions, the old brain and the new brain. The old brain is responsible for instinct and survival. It controls basic functions like breathing and motor reflexes. It also processes fear. For example, if you step into a busy street and see a car coming your way, you'll instinctively jump back onto the safety of the sidewalk. This immediate, life-saving response is out of your conscious control. This is the old brain at work. These kinds of instinctive reactions keep us alive long enough for the new brain to actually learn a lesson. The new brain, or prefrontal cortex, PFC, formed within the last million years and is located right behind our eyes and forehead. Slower but more sophisticated than the old brain, the new brain is involved in higher-order thinking, such as creativity, self-control, and long-term planning. Once we're safely out of harm's way, the new brain processes what happened and uses the experience to plan for the future. The next time you approach a busy street, for example, the new brain is what tells you to approach with caution. With the right amount of accurate information, the new brain can predict and plan ahead with increased certainty. But difficulties arise when it receives too much or too little information. Having too much information, like knowing the exact chances of getting struck by a car, can overwhelm the new brain, making us feel out of control. And not having enough information, such as when exactly to cross the road, can feel overwhelming too. In both cases, the new brain goes into what-if overdrive in an attempt to get more information or prepare itself for what could happen. This can seem like a good thing. But thinking about dangerous situations can make us feel like we're actually in danger. And as we've learned, in times of fear and distress, the old brain takes over. This is the brain's survival system trying to help us, but when we rely on the old brain, we make less informed decisions and don't have as much self-control. This is how anxiety begins. As Brewer puts it, anxiety equals fear plus uncertainty. The main ideas. Chapter 2. Anxiety is the product of fear and uncertainty. The old brain controls automatic responses to dangerous situations. The new brain uses past experiences to prepare for the future. When it doesn't have appropriate information, the new brain goes into what-if overdrive. Chapter 3. Map your anxiety loop. Unwinding anxiety. We now know what causes anxiety, fear and uncertainty. But what makes anxiety unhealthy, even debilitating, is what it can become, a self-perpetuating habit that we can't seem to escape. As an example, Brewer describes Dave, a man who began experiencing intense panic attacks. They started on the highway. Statistics about the dangers of fast driving would randomly pop into his mind, causing him to hyperventilate and pull over. But Dave's anxiety wasn't limited to just driving. For instance, while on a date at a sushi restaurant, Dave suddenly worried, "What if I've developed a fish allergy?" Just the thought caused him to leave the restaurant immediately. Dave's anxiety was disrupting his relationships and his life. He had stopped driving completely. Most days, he was terrified to even get out of bed. And he was stress eating to distract himself. What helped Dave unwind his anxiety was understanding that it had become a habit, an automatic pattern of behavior. His habit loop, or the path his behavior followed, looked like this. Dave would feel afraid, avoid the situation causing his fear, and then feel better. This may seem like a reasonable course of action. But while avoidance made Dave feel safer in the moment, it was also driving his anxiety, making it worse over time. If this feels familiar, try this as a first step: map out your habit loop. In Dave's case, his trigger was the fear thought, something like, "What if I'm allergic to fish?" His behavior was leaving the situation and distracting himself with food. This would give him the reward of temporarily feeling better. Here's why mapping our loop is helpful: habits are automatic and rely on the old brain. But when we try to understand our habit, the new brain takes over. We'll be less on autopilot, and by seeing where our behavior leads, we'll feel more in control. Mapping our habit loops does more than just shift control over to the new brain. It can also bring the true impact of our behavior into focus. When faced with his loop, Dave saw pretty clearly that eating to cope with his anxiety didn't relieve his anxiety. It actually made him feel worse. Eating felt good in the moment because his brain was releasing dopamine, a chemical involved in motivation and reward. But this feel-good signal was temporary. And because eating made Dave feel worse, it triggered even more anxiety. When our old brain dictates our behavior unchecked, anxiety can become a self-perpetuating cycle. By allowing his new brain to take over, Dave was able to let go of an unhelpful coping strategy and find better ways to manage his anxiety. The main ideas, Chapter 3. Left unchecked, anxiety can become a self-perpetuating cycle, worsening over time. Our old brain forms habit loops, neurological cycles that consist of a trigger, behavior, and reward. Mapping out this loop allows our new brains to assess and choose coping strategies. Chapter 4. Stay present with RAIN. Unwinding anxiety. In the throes of anxiety, most people try to force themselves to calm down, or they rely on a coping behavior. These strategies often fail because when we're anxious, the old brain, which can't reflect, plan, or exert self-control, is in charge. So willing ourselves to calm down is fruitless. In Brewer's experience, the more his patients tried to think away their anxiety, the more anxious they became. And as we saw in the previous chapter, the coping strategies the old brain selects don't always serve us. Worrying, stress eating, doom scrolling, and drinking can provide a momentary sense of control or relief, but they can also trigger more anxiety. To truly resolve anxiety, we need to find ways to engage the new brain without overwhelming it. One way to do this is by mapping out our habit loop. Another is to build and practice mindful awareness. We can do this by embracing curiosity. Mindfulness is often associated with meditation, but Brewer doesn't think we need to learn how to meditate. Purposefully staying in the present moment engages the new brain and stops it from going into what-if overdrive. And remaining curious and non-judgmental allows us to change our relationship with our thoughts and emotions. Many of us feel ashamed or upset when we catastrophize or turn to addictive and negative coping behaviors. But this judgment doesn't make us feel better. And it doesn't stop us from doing it again. Brewer believes that if we respond to uncertainty and fear with curiosity, rather than judgment, we can create a habit loop that resolves anxiety. Here's an acronym that can help us stay present when anxiety takes hold: RAIN. The next time you feel that first prick of anxiety, ask yourself, what triggered this behavior? Am I actually in danger? Whatever the answer, remain curious and non-judgmental. Once you've recognized where the anxiety is coming from, relax into it. You have little control over your anxiety. So let go. Allow and accept the emotion as it is. Don't try to push it away or avoid it. Instead, investigate it. Ask yourself, what is going on with my body right now? Finally, note these sensations using simple phrases or single words. Racing heart. Burning in the belly. When one of Brewer's patients used rain before speaking with someone she was on bad terms with, she came out with these thoughts. I was proud of how I handled it. I was also able to take that success and appreciate it, which helped my outlook on the day. Even though the meeting wasn't amazing, rain helped her to stay present in the discussion, instead of getting lost in her anxious thoughts. The main ideas, Chapter 4. Typical anti-anxiety strategies rely on the old brain and may not work long-term or in moments of high anxiety. Mindfulness helps you remain aware of what your old and new brains are doing and how your habits really make you feel. Using mindfulness to map out habit loops can make you aware of anxiety-induced and anxiety-inducing bad habits as they happen. Chapter 5. Hack your reward system. Why is being curious such a powerful tool when it comes to unwinding our anxiety? Brewer believes that curiosity helps us break out of habits by hacking our old brain's reward system. Back in the days of our ancient ancestors, food was difficult to come by. So when a cave person found food, the brain released dopamine, a chemical associated with motivation and pleasure. This reward signal motivated our ancestors to seek out even more food, creating a habit loop that helped them survive. See food. Eat food. Feel good. Repeat. This process is called reward-based learning. Our old brain ranks our behaviors based on their reward value, how big of a dopamine hit they provide. The more rewarding the behavior, the more likely we are to perform it and create a habit. But these habits aren't set in stone. Brewer believes we can reset the reward values of our behaviors by being curious about them. For instance, many of Brewer's patients come to him with the desire to quit smoking. Their habit loop usually looks like this: have an anxious thought. Smoke a cigarette. Feel momentarily better. He asks them to become curious the next time they bring a cigarette to their mouths. How do I feel in this moment? What am I really getting from this? When they do this, many of his patients report feeling repulsed. They realize that smoking actually tastes bad. This awareness helps them let go of the behavior. Indeed, in 2011, Brewer's first clinical trials for smoking cessation showed a quit rate 5 times higher than that of the gold standard program. Curiosity hacks our reward system in a second way by having its own reward value. Being curious and aware of ourselves actually feels quite good. So if we can train ourselves to be curious in response to our triggers, we can replace our negative behaviors with mindful awareness. Not only does this break anxiety's habit loop, it creates a new one that actually resolves our distress. Brewer's Unwinding Anxiety app, which leads people through a similar exercise, reported a 63% reduction in anxiety in people with generalized anxiety disorder. Cultivating curiosity and awareness takes time. But with practice, we can learn to disentangle ourselves from our anxious thoughts. And we can create new habit loops that serve us. The main ideas, Chapter 5. To change a habitual behavior, reset its reward value by being curious about it and asking yourself, what am I really getting from this? Using curiosity, we can replace negative behaviors with mindful awareness and break anxiety's habit loop in favor of those that resolve our distress.